Warning! Kinda Murdery contains adult themes, explicit language, and descriptions of violence. It is not suitable for anyone, and we recommend you stop listening now.
Hello everyone, and welcome to Kinda Murdery, a true crime podcast that's mostly about murder, and always about the strange and compelling stories that arise when the path less traveled twists to darkness, and those who walk its shadows surrender to violence and moral corruption. We have a perilous journey ahead, so thank you for lending me your courage and good company. I'm Zevin Odelberg, and this is Kinda Murdery. But great news today, guys. I'm not just Zevin Odelberg. I am we, or us, because Anson Maddox is back. Anson, how you doing today?
I'm doing good. Thank you.
Thank you for being here.
It's good to be here.
It's a pleasure to see you as always. Yeah, the little vocal duet we have going here. Today's story is called A Buck Horny by Any Other Name. The Menage a Trois murder of Deborah Spicer.
What?
So, what? Exactly.
This might not be appropriate.
Oh, it is not. It is not appropriate. There's already a disclaimer at the start of the show that says that this show is not appropriate for anyone and should be turned off by everyone immediately. But in case we need another disclaimer, yes, this episode contains explicit sexual content. The story does. I mean, Anson and I won't be getting overly explicit ourselves, I don't think. I like to
third date.
Keep my options open creatively. I like to keep my options open creatively, but I don't really have much of a phone sex background, so we'll probably keep it clean ourselves, but the story does have some lurid details, I suppose you could say. I had this Amazon package sitting right next to my computer that I kept bumping with my hand. Nothing quite like the sound of crinkling plastic to
go with the theme of the day.
Make your recording excellent. Yeah, right. So, I wanted to mention, and I'm sure many of you are already aware of this, but A Buck Horny by Any Other Name is in some ways a reference to William Shakespeare and the play Romeo and Juliet, in which Juliet, discussing the fact that Romeo is a Montague, her family's hated nemesis, she being a Capulet, and yet she loves him anyway. She goes on to give this speech about how Montague is just a name, it's not his face or his hands or his arm or any other actual part of him, and that she loves him regardless and his name has nothing to do with him, and the famous line coming out of that is, "A rose by any other name would smell as sweet." That's where that came from, and in a moment, when we start the story, we will be discussing what A Buck Horny by Any Other Name refers to.
And how it's different from a buck antlery, which would be more appropriate, right?
Oh, that is an A+ dad joke.
Is it really?
Right at the top. No, it's true. I mean, in fact, the occasional deer hunter will get sort of cranky if you try to call those antlers horns. It is, and so will a scientist. They are not, in fact, horns. And I believe what the difference is that antlers they are grown each year and then lost, as opposed to horns, which are permanently affixed to the animal. But actually, I was thinking about it in terms of more like actual horniness,
I know.
Which, by the way, bucks are famous for as well, their general horniness, particularly in the fall. I found today's story in the 1992 True Detective yearbook, year-end yearbook, which was themed and entitled Sex Slayings. And there was an amazing headline on the front cover that said, "Kinky swingers flung their sex slave off a cliff." Now, talk about a teaser. I don't know anybody who's like me, but if you see a headline printed in all caps yellow that says, "Kinky swingers flung their sex slave off a cliff," I dare you not to read that story. I don't think you can resist it. It's like you can't eat just one Lay's potato chip. You gotta read about the kinky swingers who flung their sex slave off a cliff, or at least I had to. And so that is where this story was discovered. It's called Oregon Shocker, Kinky Swingers flung their sex slave off a cliff, and it was written by one Gary C. King. I also did some additional research into the case, and so I'll be doing some combination of paraphrasing the story, occasionally borrowing directly from the article, but I wanted to give credit where credit is due, and that's where the credit's due. All right, there you go. And now, if you are ready, please join me and Anson as we uncover what truths we can and solve what mysteries we may. Kinda Murderies, a buck Horny by any other name. The Menage a Trois murder of Deborah Spicer starts now. You know, I was laughing at you with your at the top dad joke there about the bucks and their horns.
That's how you kill a joke. Is you point out the difference between horns and antlers and kill the whole. What is it?
I don't know. I love dad jokes, and I was gonna say. In fact, it's funny when I do my terrible punning and dad jokes. My daughter chuckles at some of them, and she'll be like, "I love that one." And other times she'll just go, "Oh, it hurts. It hurts." Speaking of which, why did I go with a buck Horny? Well, I guess I'll just say I could say you're gonna find out, but I could also tell you that two of the characters, the actual humans in this story, their surname is Backorny.
Wow.
That's Bockorny. Backorny. So I read Backorny and I thought Buck Horny because this was a sex slaying story, and there you go. So grown away, folks. All right.
Fitting.
I'm going to take you back now to October 7th, 1989. It was a chill Saturday morning when Mike Courtney, not his real name, names have been changed to protect the innocent. So Mike Courtney puts his fishing gear in the bed of his truck. It's shortly before daybreak as he backs out of his driveway with a steaming cup of coffee in hand, headed out of the Portland Metroplex area, and he's heading up to the banks of the Clackamas River in rural Clackamas County, Oregon. What a great county name. Like, seriously? Clackamas County? That's real?
Somewhere in Fallout, one of the early Fallout games.
Oh, yeah?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah? Oh, they do like to go to sort of ghost town type of places in those Fallout games,
well,
don't
take
they?
The dystopian approach of kind of renaming a town, but you can still tell what it used to be, but they kind of respell it to something similar.
Right, that makes sense, yeah. And the truth is, in a lot of these, and I'm from here, so I can say this, but in the rural Northern California towns and counties, Northern California, Southern Oregon, I mean, you don't have to change much of anything. Imaginarily? What's the word?
Imaginatively.
Thank you. Imaginatively? You don't to make it dystopian and sort of post-apocalyptic. I mean, they're basically just doing documentary reporting there. So anyway, he's headed to the banks of the Clackamas River in rural Clackamas County, Oregon. And there he meets up with a group of other men he doesn't really know, but it's just, a bunch of guys who want to go fishing early on a Saturday morning, and they head out to the banks of the Clackamas. I'm really trying to come up with some stupid joke about Clackamas, but failing so far.
Kind of sounds like onomatopoeia.
Yeah, exactly.
Like
sure does.
Kind of like bowling sound effect or something.
Exactly. And just in case anyone we're listening to didn't ace their SAT verbals like Anson Maddox, what does onomatopoeia mean?
Oh, I'm sorry. It's words that sound like what they are, like plop or
okay, or a buzzing bee. Yeah.
Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah.
I like it. Okay, so these guys, and they're heading out to fish for steelhead. It was a beautiful, tranquil day, and everybody's stoked to be away from the hustle and bustle of the city. When Mike arrives at the river at a pre-selected location on the river's south shore on the bank, he knew he was going to go fish there. He was about 300 yards upstream from the Carver boat ramp, and he was happy to see that the first rays of sunlight were just rising in the eastern sky. It looked like it was going to be a beautiful day. He'd prepared himself by bringing rain gear just in case, because as anyone from that Pacific Northwest region of the United States knows, you can get any kind of weather at the drop of a hat. So this wise man packed his rain gear because he knew that in terms of weather, and in fact otherwise, just about anything can and does happen in Oregon, as Mike Courtney was about to discover. Dun dun dun.
I doubt that's the music that you're going to put to the story. Oh no, you know what? Just
are you daring me?
Just deepen it a little bit.
I'll just keep
more
it
booming.
Yeah.
And the beverage sip, just make that really close to the mic.
Yeah. Yeah. Just do like a sort of The Office version of the show where it would just do as many kind of like awkward, physically cringeworthy things as possible.
RKO style, the old Foley
exactly.
artist.
Just me like sucking soda through the eye at the bottom of a cup, like through the ice really noisily, like an obnoxious 8-year-old. Yeah. And now for the next 30 minutes, I will make Anson Maddox sit here while I chew ice. No, no, sorry. All right, moving on. Banks of the river are lined with fog, despite the clear sky overhead. The scene was peaceful. Even with all the other fishermen around, the fog lent an eerie mood to the quiet morning. Nevertheless, Courtney put his line in the water and hoped he would quickly hook a big one. Do you fish, Anson? Any fishing in your life?
I fished currently? A lot in the past, but I live in the desert now, so I would have to pretend.
Pretend fishing, that was one of my favorite birthday party games as a young kid. They would hang up a blanket and somebody hides behind it with little prizes, and you throw the line over the blanket and then you hook a little prize. I used to love that as a kid.
Sounds familiar.
Well, I guess in the desert you've got, what would you have? Silverfish, I guess that's your only fish.
Yeah, we've got cockroaches, scorpions, centipede.
Yes.
Tarantula hawks.
Delicious.
Tarantula hawks.
What is, I'm familiar with a mosquito hawk. Can you please enlighten me on the nature of a tarantula hawk? Tarantula
hawks are heavily armored wasps that they get large, like larger than a mosquito hawk, but they lay their eggs in tarantulas, and the eggs mature and eat their way out of the live tarantula.
Oh my God, that poor tarantula.
And I guess I've heard that their sting is one of the most excruciating experiences you can go through, and it lasts for like 5 minutes. I think it's 5 minutes, and then the entire time people are said to be curled up in a fetal position, screaming their lungs out, and then after the 5 minutes, supposedly it goes away, and you're fine if you didn't, die from a heart attack or something.
Okay, I thought you were going to say totally euphoria.
Well, I mean, you've got all that adrenaline in your system, all those endorphins. What are you going to do with them?
Yeah. So, like, weird desert junkies are out there capturing tarantula hawks to, like, sting themselves
All you have to do is get some cabin fever. Be in the desert long enough, you might think it would be an interesting experience.
Oh, my goodness. That sounds really terrifying. I and probably a few of the listeners will immediately, after the show here, be Googling tarantula hawk and, shivering. Where I'm from up in Northern California, we have a wasp of a sort that I don't know what it's actually called, but my dad always called them stump fuckers. Probably because you see them on stumps. They're probably laying their eggs in stumps, but it's a giant black wasp about 3 inches in length, and it has a stinger that's, I don't know, always looks like it's about as big around as like one of those little red and white coffee stirring straws. I'm sure it's not actually that big around, but I thankfully, knock on wood, have never been stung by one, nor would I care to be. I see your tarantula hawk, and I raise you a stump fucker.
I'll come up with something to top that, I'm sure.
Although, to be honest, I don't think I can even call or see the tarantula hawk with a stump fucker. Names notwithstanding, the tarantula hawk sounds significantly more frightening to me. Okay, so back to our story. So he's waiting for the fish to hit, and he's watching the cliffs. This is Mike Courtney, our friendly neighborhood fisherman. Opposite him to the north, when the nearby local communities start to come to life, he can hear and occasionally see cars and trucks as they motor down the highway. Sort of a typical bucolic Saturday morning in Southern Oregon. And then, a few minutes before 8 a.m., so again, not terribly early in the morning anymore, Courtney sees a silver blue van on the road slow down and stop along a gravel turnout atop the cliff. He watches for several minutes as the driver peels the van tires in the loose gravel, backing it up and then driving it forward, and then backing it up and then driving it forward. The driver repeats the process a few times, apparently trying to get the van into just the right position for some mysterious purpose. Finally, after he's parked the van, all was quiet again along the riverbank, until about 20 minutes later, when Courtney looks up again at the North Cliffs, and he can't believe his eyes. He sees a man with what looks like a naked woman hoisted over his shoulder in a fireman's carry, walking to the edge of the high cliff. In one swift motion, the man takes the woman from his shoulder and tosses her over the side of the cliff toward the river some 70 feet below. Okay, pause for commentary.
Worst date ever.
Oh my God. Yes. But also, you're disposing of a body, right? You wait until 8 a.m. in the morning on a Saturday morning in broad daylight, and then you drive it to an area of the river where a whole bunch of people that you can see if you were to look over the cliff, because they can see you, are fishing, and you just chuck a naked dead body off the cliff on top of a bunch of fishermen. Let's unpack that for a moment. I mean, presumably, right, you're disposing of a dead body because you are fundamentally, at least theoretically, you're being sneaky. You dispose of a dead body to sneakily cover your tracks, right? If you weren't being sneaky, you could leave the dead body in a rocking chair on your front porch. Am I wrong?
You can completely excuse all of this behavior with meth. I mean,
right.
There's the meth.
Right. And that's what I don't want to do because it seems less fun. Not that we should be having fun. This is awful. But let's pretend for a second that meth doesn't exist. And let's take a little journey into this guy's mind, because I don't actually know for a fact that he was on meth or a meth head or anything else.
He just made some bad decisions.
I'm trying to imagine the thought process that goes with, okay, so if it was pitch black, 3 a.m., 4 a.m. in the morning, a deserted stretch of road along the river, and you're like, I'm just going to chuck this body off the cliff, that makes a little bit of sense to me. Like, in terms of assuming your objective is to get rid of the body so you don't get caught.
Maybe he was pissed off. Maybe he had an argument with somebody about whether they should get rid of the body, and they just decided to, I'll show them.
He's like, fuck you, I'm going to do it here, and I'm going to do it now.
I mean, if any of it makes sense, I'd be surprised.
Like, the other person was like, listen, we need to dissolve this thing in a bathtub full of acid. And he was like, no, my daddy always said chuck it in the river in the bright lights of the morning with a bunch of fishermen below.
Right, but the one who chucked it over the cliff would be the one that wanted to dissolve it in the bathtub full of acid, and then he was talked into dumping it in the woods somewhere or something, and that's why he was pissed off, and then he just threw it over.
He was like, oh yeah, the woods, huh? I'll tell you what I'm going to do. I got you. He was like, you know what? Screw you in your woods. We're doing it here. We're doing it now. Like, we're dumping this body, or I'm going to turn this car back around, is basically what you're saying. He just got fed up with the whole debate.
Exactly. So he knew how stupid it was, and he was trying to prove a point.
I see. You know how stupid this is? You know how stupid your idea is? It's just as dumb as if I threw this body off the cliff right now in the broad daylight on top of a bunch of middle-aged fishermen. It's just that dumb. And you know what? To prove it, I'm just gonna do that. We're gonna do that now. We're gonna see how your idea would work.
See how soon we get caught this way.
Okay, there you go. Okay, so it just came down to just like really ill-advised fury in sort of a triggered kind of spousal argument, if you will. Like, we've had this how to dispose of body a million times, fight a million times, and I'm just sick of it. I'm sick of it. Got it. I like that. I like that. That makes about as much sense as a meth addiction. Yeah. So, poor Mike Courtney's just trying to catch a couple steelhead. He looks, and he sees this guy, as mentioned. He's got a naked woman hoisted over his shoulder, walks to the edge of the cliff, and then chucks her over to the side of the river some 70 feet below. And Mike, he watches in astonishment and horror as the body on the way down tumbles onto an outcropping of the cliff. Well, our body chucker, he said you shouldn't do anything unless you're willing to see it through. If you're not going to do something well, don't do it at all, right? So do you think he leaves that body just hanging on the outcropping?
Well, does he?
What do you think?
Does he lean over the cliff to see if it made it down? Is that?
Well, he sees, just like the fisherman sees, that it made it part of the way down, and then it got stuck.
Oh.
Honestly,
so does he notice that he was witnessed?
If he didn't, he was awfully gosh darn oblivious, but one thinks he was probably awfully gosh darn oblivious because he did, in fact, just chuck the body over the ledge without looking over the ledge, because if he had, he would have seen all the fishermen.
I can think of what he would have done if he was particularly stupid, but I would like to know what.
Let's hear it.
Oh, I would just think that maybe he suddenly thought that he needed to explain what just happened, that he was just seen doing, and he is coming up with a scenario where his girlfriend would be naked and accidentally slip and fall off the cliff, and he tries to get down to help her, and yeah.
Right. So she's not already dead. She doesn't die until he accidentally fails to help her. If this whole thing wasn't such an awful, macabre occurrence of a murdered dead young woman, it almost reads like a National Lampoon's Vacation movie where poor Chevy Chase is just so frustrated because he can't do anything right, and he gets progressively madder and madder. It's like, God damn it, I'm just trying to chuck a body off a cliff, and now it's stuck, Just like so frustrated
cue
about
the
it.
trombone music and yeah.
Right. And it's all Randy Quaid's fault. So he tries to chuck the woman off the cliff. She falls a ways and then she gets stuck on this outcropping. The man who tossed the body over, in answer to your question, he also sees that the body's stuck. So he starts crawling down the steep embankment to the ledge. Then, when he reaches the body, he pushes it over the side and watches it fall until it makes a splash in the river below. Hey, Mike Courtney, the fisherman, shouts to the other fisherman. Somebody just tossed a body off the cliff. Hey.
Wow.
So basically, the other fishermen think that Mike is the meth head, so to speak, and they just kind of ignore him. Like, who's this crazy guy talking about a body that just got chucked off a cliff? Because I guess not everybody in their morning fishing reverie observed this. But then, of course, they do see it as the corpse basically floats by them, drifting in the shallow water. And as the stunned spectators watch, the body drifts a few feet until it becomes, you guessed it, lodged against some rocks, just like before, except now floating in the water. Except for rolling in motion to the time of the rushing water, the figure doesn't move, at which point everybody realizes that it's dead. So Courtney, still in a state of shock, looks up the cliff to see the van peeling out and speeding away down the highway. So the dude that just dumped the body's like, phew, boy, like wiping his hands. He's like, glad we got that done. Time to just drive off, ignoring the fact that you did it in front of a dozen people who are awake and aware. So they go speeding off down the highway. This is in the pre-cell phone era, 1989. So at this point, several of the fishermen run back to their trucks and drive off to find telephones. And within minutes, calls about the dead naked woman in the river come pouring into the Clackamas County Sheriff's Office dispatch center. And any of the fishermen who chose to not just drive home return to the river where the dead body is stuck in an eddy. And they just kind of watch and wait to see what the lawmen will do when they arrive.
So they don't try to retrieve her?
I guess not. I mean, I think that she's pretty obviously dead, and probably not tampering with a dead body was the right call.
If there's more than one of them there, then they could back each other's story up. But yeah, okay.
Oh, no.
You don't want it to go further down the river.
Oh, yeah, that's true. Although I think it was when it got stuck in the eddy, like against the rock where the current was kind of keeping it wedged and bobbing. That's when they all decided, okay, it's safe to run to our cars and try to find a phone. I mean, again, this is just rank supposing here, but perhaps had it been just rocketing down the current like a kayak, perhaps then they would have, or the right thing to do.
Like the Swiss Army man?
Jeez. Perhaps then you dive into the water and drag the naked corpse out. But since it's conveniently stuck in an eddy, they were able to summon law enforcement, which just goes back to this asshole dumping the body being just a complete idiot. Because one would think that there's more than one spot along the cliffs along the river, right? And one would think that if you're going to dump a body off a cliff into the river, that you might look over the cliff before you remove the body to make sure that there wasn't, in fact, a group of some dozen witnesses just waiting to watch you chuck the body.
I mean, think of it. He probably knew they were down there and knew they weren't going to do anything.
Okay.
Because they didn't. Well, they went and made a phone call.
Right.
That's good.
Right. But see, I'm trying to make it make any sense in which it's like I'm trying
to play devil's advocate.
It's like I want to. Yeah, I know. It's like, okay, well, if he still was going to dump it here, But even though there were all these witnesses, then that would mean that he had scouted this location beforehand, and he knew, like, either, like, spiritually this is the spot where the demons he'd sold his soul to had promised he wouldn't be caught if he dumped it right here on these, like, magical ley lines, or he knew that, like, right here the river ran directly into a wood chipper or straight out to sea on the back of a giant pike or something, right? There has to be some reason why this is the spot, regardless of all the witnesses.
Maybe the meth fairies told him that's where he had to dump the body.
Right, which is a good reminder for everyone. The meth fairies are actually out to get you. Don't listen to them.
Unless, of course, you have a problem, you need to call you need to use the helpline.
Right. Yes. Then if you're having mental health or hallucination or substance use problems, call 988, which is not a matter for levity. It's a wonderful place that anyone can call to get help.
It is a serious thing.
988, program it into your phone now. And please do always remember that you are loved and the world is a better place with you in it. Back to this bizarre story we're telling. Okay, I'm going to dump it here, even though there's witnesses, because for some reason I've scouted this spot and this is the spot. Except, no, you didn't, because this is the spot where as soon as the body hits the water, it gets stuck against a rock and lodged in the current. You didn't dispose of the body in any way, shape, or form. You just, like, dumped it for future storage in front of a dozen witnesses who had the ability to call the police. The police arrive. The sheriff's deputies survey the entire crime scene, after which they round up all the witnesses. And after briefly viewing the body, the investigators begin by taking statements from the witnesses. Which brings us back to our man, Mike Courtney. He says, I heard the van on the road going back and forth, peeling out. Then, about 20 minutes later, there was this guy walking down to the edge of the cliff with a lady over his shoulder. Courtney describes how the man threw the body over the side, how he himself yelled to the other fishermen about what he'd seen, and he goes, all those other fishermen, they all looked at me like I was on drugs. That other guy was dumping a body off the cliff, but I'm the one on drugs? I heard a splash, and somebody says there's a body, and a minute later there's this body just floating along, which is basically what I just described, I guess, but I just wanted to put it in the words of the men who were actually there. So they described the man who tossed the corpse over the cliff as bearded and burly with dark brown curly hair. He was wearing a plaid shirt and dark pants. He appeared to be between 30 and 40 years old, about 175 to 200 pounds, and approximately 5'7", give or take an inch.
How many people saw the guy?
It's unclear to me, actually. From what I have here, it just says the witnesses described the man. So presumably Mike Courtney, our main character so far, is not the only one who saw him. I have this
vision of Mike Courtney going farther upstream, dumping the body, and then zooming downstream and getting his fishing pole out and saying, hey, some guy just threw a body in the water.
Yeah, you know what? And that's probably why they changed Mike's name. Because of folks like you and their visions that are spuriously incriminating. Oh, wow. No, I'm with you, though.
Job.
I mean,
making stuff up.
Exactly. Personally, whenever I dump a body off a cliff into a river, I like to... Oh, right. It's not your job to dump bodies off of cliffs into rivers. Got it. Well, whenever I do it, though, I do like to immediately follow that up by cosplaying a fisherman on the bank. It's just part of the whole deal. Don't ask me why the meth fairies told me to do it.
Look what I caught.
Okay. Some of the witnesses think that there may have been a second person in the van, but no one's sure whether it was a man or a woman. And no one had a chance to see the license plate. They just know it was a mid to late 70s model, perhaps a Ford, and it was either kind of gray blue or silver blue. The deputy medical examiner puts on chest waders and he goes out to make a preliminary examination of the body while it's still in the river. Now, he can see that the corpse sustained several wounds during the fall off the cliff, which makes sense, but that there were several other wounds that appeared related to the actual death. Then when he's finished, the divers remove the body from the river. So now the question is, who was this mystery woman? And why had someone chosen to kill her? And detectives knew that until they made an identification, it was going to be hard to solve their murder. I mean, that's pretty obvious. But they're not really sure how the heck they're going to identify this woman. The only thing they have that seems like it might be a clue is a small turquoise earring, a single earring in one of her ears. But it doesn't seem like the earring alone is going to identify her. Now, time is of the essence, though, as it is in any criminal investigation, or so I'm told. And they don't want to necessarily just wait for somebody to come forward. to report a missing person. On the other hand, if they make all this public, they're going to get a bunch of crank tips, fake tips from people who just busybodies who like to be involved. But they do decide that they need to move quickly. And so they do release the information to the press. And as it turns out, they don't have to wait very long. The very next day, a Gresham, Oregon woman contacted the authorities in Multnomah County about a missing relative. She said that the relative was 27-year-old Deborah Sue Spicer, and Deborah Sue Spicer had not returned home from a night of drinking on October 6th. She provides the description of Deborah Sue Spicer, which fits the description of the nude victim in the regional alert, and shortly thereafter, they do in fact identify the corpse as belonging to Deborah Sue Spicer. Deborah was born on July 31st, 1962 in Columbus, Ohio. She moved to California with her family at age 5, and a year after that, they moved to Oregon and settled in East Multnomah County. She was a cheerleader at Reynolds High School in Portland, and she graduated in 1980. She had a job as a secretary. She liked tennis, skiing, and bowling, but apparently she had migraine headaches, and she had them so frequently that she had to miss a lot of work, and eventually she just quit her job. So lately, she had been drinking regularly. She'd been drinking a little, if you will, but meaning she had been drinking a lot. And police learned that she had been seen at a local tavern the night before her body was seen being thrown in the river. The relative said that Deborah liked to have fun with other young people her age. She would play pool with girls and boys. She liked to have parties, but she also liked her home, and her favorite pastime was reading romantic novels. So she'd had dinner on Friday night with her relatives and a boyfriend. In the back, the boyfriend was there when she went out Friday night, there being at Deborah's house with the family. And the boyfriend and Deborah had stir-fried everyone a dinner. You know, I'm wondering what the stir-fry was.
And was it spicy?
They provide all kinds of details, and then just somebody decides that this particular detail is not important. Like, she liked to play tennis, she liked to go swimming, she liked to this, she liked to that. But then they won't tell me what she stir-fried? Come on.
Is it a word count issue? Did they need to fill some space?
Oh, man, I don't know. Probably. This is a weird fact. So the relative told investigators that she and another relative had last seen Deborah at about 3 a.m. on Saturday, October 7th. She showed up to her relative's apartment where Deborah also lived with a man and a woman who the relative had never seen before. So you're going to show up to your family's apartment at 3 a.m. with a man and a woman, 3 a.m. on a Saturday night?
Is it a meth family?
Yeah, the methsters.
Maybe they weren't asleep.
Right, I guess, yeah. Most likely, yes.
Is there anybody in this story who wasn't on meth?
It's Southern Oregon, man. Probably not. No offense, Oregon. Yes. I love you.
Fishing.
Yes. Boy, if you think fishing is boring when you're sober.
Oh,
no. All right. Okay, so, yeah, the family says, yeah, we saw she came by the house at 3 a.m. with a mysterious couple. We didn't think anything about it was weird, though. Anyway, so the relative described the man as 6 feet tall, 25 to 40 years old, with dark sunken eyes. His black hair reached his collar in the back, but was shorter on the sides. He had a beard and tattoos on both forearms. I'd just like to note that if this is in fact the same man who chucked the body off the cliff, he's just grown by 5 inches, with someone else telling the tale. Of course, all the fishermen said he was about 5'7". Sounds to me like they weren't exactly accounting for the angle when they all craned their heads all the way back to look up the cliff, right?
That's foreshortening. That's what it's called. Things get compressed as you look at them from an extreme angle.
That's what I told her, but she still laughed at me.
Oh. I would like to apologize for my own indelicacies during this story. Just want to put that out there.
Okay. Yeah, you can apologize, but who's going to accept it? That's what I want to know. I like this foreshortening thing, though. I'd not heard about that before, and seeing as I'm 6'4", I feel like I can use this to explain a lot of things.
How long is my arm?
Ooh, let me see. How long is your arm? Ooh, it's so long.
No, but
is
that's
so
your
long.
Perception, right? But it's like, it's
right.
not that long. right?
Right.
For short.
Right. And besides, right, I got it, because everybody calls you Anson Stubby Arms Maddox. So clearly this is some sort of trick of the light.
They call me the Gibbon.
Oh, but some very long
my
arms.
My arm span is longer than my height, which is unusual.
Is it really? Do you have that disorder that Abe Lincoln had where your arms are as long as your legs? I forget what that's called, but isn't that a thing?
I don't know. I don't know. I've never been particularly good at cartwheels, so it can't be.
I'm going to look this up here. Abe Lincoln, arms as long as legs.
He's kind of like an asterisk missing a couple limbs, huh?
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, here we go. It is a thing. It's called Marfan syndrome, and it's a connective tissue disorder that affects many structures, including the skeleton, lungs, eyes, heart, and blood vessels. The disease is characterized by unusually long limbs and is believed to have affected Abraham Lincoln. So I wasn't fully making that up. All right.
No, I don't have Marfan syndrome. Is that what it's called?
But they do call you the Gibbon. I like it.
I call myself the Gibbon because, I'm good at fencing.
Because that's a cool, because it's a cool gangstery sounding nickname. Yeah. Anson the Gibbon Maddox. Yeah, I like it. All right. Okay, Becky, back on track. So he's got lots of tattoos on both forearms. Lots of tattoos can and also cannot, but can be another sign of methamphetamine use. So I not exactly grew up, but my mom grew up in San Diego, and every summer I spent the summers in San Diego. We would travel to visit my grandparents, and I would stay at my grandparents with my sister and my mom for a couple months. And there was a kid across the street who I played with in the summers. We were the same age from probably about age 8 until, 13, 14. We would just see each other in the summers, but we were friends. Then one summer, I came to my grandparents' house, and this was in college. I was probably 22, 23. He was a year younger than me, so he was probably a year younger than that. And he lived right across the street from my grandparents' house. And my grandfather, God rest him, was a Jewish man. And this kid who I'd grown up with, who was a normal kid for all of my young life, was in the parking area of his dad's house. And he was shirtless, and he had a shaved head and a giant black Edward Norton from American History X swastika that was about almost a foot tall tattooed onto his left pec. And that was just horrifying, but also terrifying, because here my grandfather's a Jewish man. Here's this kid I've not known well, but we were definitely friends who played together as children. And all of a sudden I come one summer and I'm like, hey, name deleted, nice to see ya. And he's like a skinhead with a giant swastika tattooed on his chest. And he also has a tattoo gun, which he shows me, and a bunch of unfinished tattoos all over his body, but of course he finished the swastika. And he has a primer paint Dodge Dart in the driveway that he's restoring. Well, and he's missing a couple teeth, but the way that I really put 2 and 2 together on the meth front was, look, if you're going to be up all night and you're not tired, you need something to do, right? And what this guy would do was work on the car he was restoring, specifically work on the engine all night long in the pitch black. Like he might have a flashlight he held in one hand, but no other lighting other than that. And he would be under the car with a hammer, banging on the underside of the car and swearing a blue streak. God damn, motherfucker. Blah. And then he would get out from under the car, swearing, get in the car, turn it on, and gun it. God, motherfucker. He would be doing this all night. And I slept upstairs in my grandparents' house near like the window that overlooked his house. And starting at about midnight until, 4 or 5 in the morning, he would spend the entire night under the car, banging on it with a hammer in the pitch black, swearing and gunning the engine.
Wow.
Yeah, it was really intense. I was pretty concerned for my safety, my family's safety. This went on for a few weeks. I was there. Nothing untoward really happened. He was always outwardly friendly. We just didn't address the giant swastika on his naked chest or the staying up all night gunning the engine of his car and swearing. But then after a couple weeks go by, he buys a motorcycle from a friend of his for $500 and ends up getting arrested for receiving stolen property and back in jail, which was a huge relief. I mean, I feel bad for him and how sideways his life went, but it was super uncomfortable having him be my grandparents' next door neighbor.
Oh, yeah.
My grandparents had always been very kind to this boy, and he was close to them too. In fact, his mother passed away when he was pretty darn young, 12 or 13. And his dad was always traveling on business. And so you could sort of trace in an almost Freudian sense, although Freudian is the wrong word, but you could see where his life went sideways. His mom died when he was young. That's very tragic. His dad didn't handle it very well. Plus, his dad was always traveling for work, so he was kind of alone and in need of comfort. And during those years, my grandparents were very kind to him, but that in his loneliness and grief and need, the family that he found, the companionship that he found, unfortunately, was a bunch of white supremacists, which also, unfortunately, there are a fair number of in San Diego County. You know, he found the wrong new family, but it was especially sad, I mean, that it happened at all, but also that he would choose an ideology that was so, opposed to my family when they had always been kind to him as well. Man, we got to get back on track here. Oh, we started talking about the tattoos on the mysterious body-dumping man's body, and that spiraled out. Okay, the man had a lot of tattoos. One of those tattoos was a star, or perhaps a snowflake. He was wearing a flannel shirt, open in the front, a tank top, and jeans, and he had another tattoo on his chest that read, Debbie Lynn. So we've discovered the identity of our victim as Deborah Sue Spicer. Is that the same Debbie whose name is tattooed on the man's chest? Well, I don't know, is it? The woman was described as 5'2" to 5'5" with light brown hair. She appeared to be in her 30s and was of medium build. She was wearing a short-waisted black jacket and jeans. A boyfriend with whom Deborah had been fighting told detectives that he'd received a phone call from Deborah about 4 a.m. on Saturday from an undisclosed location. I think we can all sort of safely assume that this couple she brought by her family's house at 3 a.m. is probably the couple that the menage happened with. So at 4 a.m., she calls the boyfriend who she's fighting with from an undisclosed location. Although the details were sketchy, Deborah had apparently told her boyfriend she was fighting with that she was at the home of a Gresham couple and that they'd wanted her to engage in sex acts and that she hadn't wanted to participate. And apparently she'd asked the boyfriend for help getting out of the situation. Deborah was no saint, said one of her relatives, but she was not a bad girl. That person had to be crazy to do what they did. What kind of person would do that? Kill somebody just because she didn't want to do what they wanted her to do and then just toss her without clothes off a cliff? I don't care what that man was. I want him caught. No, I want him dead. I believe in capital punishment. He took her life, and no matter what she was, she didn't deserve to die like that or any other way. This is quoting an unnamed relative of the victim. And, you know, she's right. Deborah did not deserve to die like that or in any other way. So later the same day, Dr. Karen Gunson, a deputy Multnomah County medical examiner, performed a definitive autopsy on Deborah Spicer's body. Dr. Gunson determined that Deborah had sustained chest and abdominal knife wounds, a total of 4, as well as the wounds she received during her trip over the side of the cliff. It also appeared that Deborah had been beaten around the head and the face, but it was difficult to determine with any degree of accuracy if the wounds were the result of the beating or had been caused by the fall. There were also signs of asphyxiation, but the medical examiner was unable to determine if Deborah had been strangled manually or by other means such as having something placed over her face. Dr. Gunson's conclusion was that the primary cause of Deborah's death was from strangulation, despite the 4 stab wounds. Man, that's a bummer. Yeah. So it wasn't long before sheriff's detectives received a tip that led them to a southeast Portland tavern. This was the same tavern that Deborah Spicer was seen drinking with 2 other people. So Detective John Turner and his partner, Detective Linda Estes, waste no time and they get right over to the drinking establishment. After questioning employees and regulars at the tavern, Detective Turner and Estes eventually determined that Deborah Spicer had met Randy Charles Bacorny, 35, and his wife, Deborah Lynn Bacorny, 34, on Friday evening, October 6th. So there are in fact 2 Deborahs in the story. So witnesses placed the trio together and described Randy Buck Horny as 6 feet tall, with a medium build, blue eyes, black collar-length hair, and a Van Dyke beard. They also said he had a teardrop tattoo near his left eye and a partially drawn spiderweb tattoo on his left wrist. Both forearms, witnesses recalled, were covered in tattoos, as was much of his body. Someone said he even had a tattoo, and this is weird, wild stuff, folks, Randy Buck Horny even had a tattoo of the name of a former girlfriend on the tip of his penis.
Okay.
So I'd like to know who the bar patron was who volunteered that little tidbit.
Maybe it was just a story he told people.
Man, whew, that is either very brave or very numb man.
There's all kinds of wrong to that.
The tip of his penis. You're pretty confident that you're never going to break up with that girl, I guess.
Or, are you just going to only date women named Debbie?
Well, but this wasn't even Debbie's name. This was a former girlfriend, not his current one. So, and by the way, isn't it the nature of things like penis tattoos that I feel like it's only ever going to be a former girlfriend's name? It's like a magical law of the universe. Like the second you get someone's name tattooed on your body, but especially on your dong, you're guaranteed to break up like
That's
instantly.
why laser tattoo removal is a good technology to invest in.
Yes, I imagine it'd be terribly painful to have it lasered off your penis as well. Holy moly.
Once you've gone through the tattooing.
Yeah. Like, I thought this guy was a sick fuck just for murdering someone and chucking him off a cliff, but now I find out he's tattooing shit on the tip of his dick? Whoa! Sorry. Okay.
Out of my league.
Moving on. When Anson won't even chuckle, you know I've crossed the line. So.
I have all kinds of reasons.
Yeah. He's just getting embarrassed because I'm mocking people with dick tattoos, and that's like, how many dick tattoos do you have?
You better cut this.
Oh boy. I'm sorry, am I needling you?
No, I'm just glad that you don't know.
Am I needling you?
Oh God, you're right.
Okay.
I missed that one.
Yeah.
You got me back for the last one.
Oh yeah, no, you had some good ones in the last episode. Yeah, you're like, I'm not gonna flesh it out.
No.
So, the couple drove a silver blue 76 Ford van with a gray stripe. That's the one that Mike Courtney saw on the day the body was dumped. And further inquiries revealed that the van had Wisconsin license plates ENS 849. Detectives then learn that the Buckhorneys lived in a house on an isolated plot of land. It's a rental on a large lot in the town of Grisham, but there's really nothing around it. And so they go with warrants to check out the house, and are not terribly surprised to discover when they arrive that the Buckhorneys are no longer there. So they go in and they look for clues. They're looking for obvious things, such as weapons, and also not so obvious things, such as trace evidence, since they believe that Spicer had been killed or mortally wounded not at the location where her body was dumped. Things like fingerprints, articles of clothing, or other personal items would be particularly useful. In one of the bedrooms, they find traces of blood, and they also note that a large section of green carpet has been literally cut away from the rest of the carpet. Obviously, since this section of removed carpet is adjacent to some of the trace blood that they found, they suspect that yes, indeed, it must have something to do with her death. And then, in sort of a Holmesian sense, they find the kicker. They're looking under the bed, and they find a silver earring that matches the one that was found on the corpse in the river. So they've got a pretty good case now. Going back to just dumb criminal blunders, you gotta wonder why they left the earring in the body. I imagine folks were not too terribly sober. I really think that had to be true. Or too terribly bright.
It was a stud earring, right?
Yes.
Those aren't easy to lose.
It's true that in general they're not so. I mean, this one stayed on while her body was bouncing down a cliff. The one that stayed on. How she lost the other one, who knows? The police, with the assistance of the FBI, they subpoena the telephone records of the Buckhorneys, and they discover that they've been in more or less constant contact with friends and relatives in Wisconsin. And so they figure that the Buckhorneys probably fled to Wisconsin. Again, if you're going to flee the law and you're from Wisconsin and you have Wisconsin license plates, how about don't flee to Wisconsin? The most obvious place you could possibly flee. All right, I don't know why I keep getting mad at dumb criminals for being dumb. I mean, it's sort of a self-fulfilling prophecy.
Yeah, you're not trying to help any future criminals. You're just trying to shame the actual criminals now.
Yes, right, exactly. Now I just kind of sound like a dick. I mean, these people are already in prison. The Oregon police reach out to the Wisconsin police. They put it on an APB on the Buckhorneys van, and a few days later, on Thursday, October 26th, a Green Bay police officer spots a van that fits the description of the Bacornis. It's parked in a motel parking lot on the west side of town. They check the license plate and they find out it is indeed registered to Randy Bacorny. The officer calls for backup. The lawmen arrive, they go into the motel. The desk clerk is super helpful and says, oh yeah, I know Deborah Bacorny. She's very friendly, and she's already gotten a job as a waitress at this very motel restaurant. And then as luck would have it, who's sitting in the restaurant eating? But guess who it is? Who's sitting in the restaurant eating?
Deborah?
That's right. Deborah and Randy Bacorny. So the police surround the restaurant. Come on out with your hands up, the whole deal. And they take the Bacornys into custody with no problems, no fanfare. They then go to jail in Green Bay. The Oregon detectives fly out to Green Bay. The Bacornys immediately start fighting extradition to Oregon, which takes a week or so, and then Deborah gives up and says that she's willing to be extradited. But Randy continues to fight it, and he's still in Wisconsin for a couple more weeks. Ultimately, following their interviews with detectives, the law decides that the two, Randy and his wife, must be tried separately because of the nature of their defenses, which you probably pick up on the implication here. Essentially, each of them blamed the other one, which is why you couldn't put them on trial together. Each of them was indicted by a grand jury and charged with 2 counts of aggravated murder and 1 count of murder. The 2 aggravated murder counts allege that Deborah Spicer was killed during the commission of attempted first-degree sexual abuse, and that she was killed in an attempt to conceal that crime. The single count of murder alleged that the Bacornys had intentionally caused Spicer's death by beating, asphyxiation, and stabbing. Each suspect pleaded not guilty, and as I just mentioned, because of the nature of the evidence and the defense raised by Deborah Bacorny, separate trials were ordered. Randy went on trial first, and in opening statements, Bacorny's lawyer Kenneth Morrow blamed Spicer's death on Bacorny's wife Deborah. So, gallant to the end, Randy Bacorny assaults and murders one girl and then blames it on his wife. It's like the Ted Cruz playbook. Oh, I'm in trouble? Blame it on your wife. Blame it on my wife. All right. He said, and here's the story. Here is Randy Horny. I mean, this isn't funny. This is horrible. This poor girl was assaulted and murdered. But, I just have to say, we have a sex crime suspect or ultimately convict here, but his name is Randy Horny. I mean, it's almost like he was fated to be some kind of a weird perv, right? Randy Horny. My goodness. So here's the story. Randy learned that his wife Deborah was bisexual soon after their marriage in 1989. He told jurors that both women were naked and had been engaging in sex acts when Deborah Bacorny suddenly becomes angry and stabs Spicer with a pair of scissors. The lawyer said that Deborah Bacorny had twice prevented her husband from entering the room where she was having sex with the victim. As for Randy, he said that all 3 had been drinking heavily on the night of October 6, 1989. Now, Deputy District Attorney John Bradley told the jury that Deborah Spicer met the Bacornys at the tavern and that she'd had an earlier argument with her boyfriend at 2:30 in the morning, which is closing time for drinking establishments in Oregon. Bradley contended that both Randy and Deborah Bacorny were involved in Spicer's death. He maintained that physical evidence would show that Randy Bacorny had had sex with Spicer before she was killed. At one point, Randy Bacorny testified in his own defense. He said that he'd been drinking all day and all night on October 6th, and he said that he'd twice entered the bedroom where his wife and Spicer were lying naked on the bed, and that his wife twice told him to leave. He said he went into another bedroom and passed out, but was awakened by a noise. When he returned to the bedroom where his wife and Spicer were, he found his wife sitting over Spicer's body. He said Spicer had been stabbed, and that Deborah Bacorny was holding a pillow over Spicer's head. He said he saw bloody scissors lying on the floor near the bed. She told me, she's dead, Randy Bacorny testified. Bacorny said he then threatened to leave his wife, after which she threatened to notify the police and blame Spicer's death on him if he did so. He wanted to leave his wife immediately, but he said he didn't because Deborah told him that the police would accuse him of the murder because he had this extensive prior record, and that authorities would believe her over him, and he did. I haven't mentioned this, but Randy had dozens of convictions, had spent combined almost 10 years in prison most through the combination of various short sentences that amounted to pretty much everything except the worst crimes. He had not been convicted of murder or rape, but he'd been convicted of robbery, assault, all kinds of other stuff, and had spent almost a decade in jail. So he says, my wife knew this and said that the police would never believe me over her. He then says that Debbie Bacorny had also threatened to shoot him if he tried to interfere with her bisexual adventures. And he said that he believed that she would shoot him because she had once shot a previous husband, and even though he had objected to Deborah's bisexual activities, that he'd learned to, quote, live with it, unquote.
So is the moral to don't do crimes because you can be accused of doing more crimes? Like little crimes are a gateway to murder, and you can be found more likely to be the guilty party?
I mean, I think that's one of the morals. I'd say there's a moral that is like, don't rape, murder, and chuck bodies off of cliffs. That's moral number one. Moral number two is, if you have a long record, chances are it's going to be harder to get anyone to believe that you're innocent.
Right.
Whether or not he actually killed Spicer, I mean, Randy Buck Horny was not innocent. He still chucked that body off the cliff and then walked down to chuck it off again at the least.
Right. So he could be in prison saying, man, I shouldn't have stole that pack of gum because it led to this.
I definitely, your slippery slope is true. I mean, but I don't know if the slope is that slippery.
They both had enough baggage to accuse each other of something and have it seem more likely.
Yeah. So basically, the district attorney says, look, they were both in on it. But then Randy's attorney goes a little further in blaming Spicer's death on the wife. He says that Deborah Bacorny was a mean, volatile, vicious person who goes off the handle and loses control. That's a quote. She's a mean, volatile, vicious person who goes off the handle and loses control. He says that Deborah, who had previously been married 4 times, had fired a rifle at her first husband, shot her second husband with a handgun, attacked her third husband with a hammer, and stabbed Randy Bacorny twice. It was pointed out that the only reason she didn't have a criminal record was because her husbands had chosen not to press charges against her.
Thanks.
So that's interesting, right? Now maybe it's starting to seem a little more likely that she was in fact the one who stabbed Deborah Spicer. If it's true, and I would think that it's demonstrable whether it's true or not, at least through witness testimony, although I suppose some of them could be lying. But if it's true that she shot one husband and stabbed another, shot one with a rifle and one with a pistol and stabbed another, etc., well, that sounds like somebody who could get furious when the local girl didn't want to sleep with her and stab her with a pair of scissors. That does sound plausible. Although it is interesting to me how often in these criminal justice stories, the sort of biblical just blame the woman angle bears fruit. There's a lot of, I'm not about to get up on a soapbox, but there's a lot of baked-in sexism in our society and in the legal system. People very often seem much more comfortable and quicker to blame the woman than the man in all kinds of situations. Speaking of blaming the woman, let's talk about Deborah's trial. So Deborah's basic defense goes like this. Deborah says that Randy, this is Deborah Bacorny obviously, says that he had threatened to kill her if she did not participate in the sex acts that led to Spicer's death. Her attorney says that Randy had demanded that his wife and Spicer remove their clothes and engage in sex. However, he eventually began choking Spicer because he feared that she would notify the police about the forced sex act. Deborah's defense is basically Randy raped the girl and then murdered her because he was afraid she would tell someone that he'd raped her, which is awful. And Deborah's defense attorney characterized his client, this is Deborah Bacorny, as a battered woman who was afraid of her husband. He said that she stabbed the victim, so he admits that Deborah Bacorny stabbed Deborah Spicer, but that she stabbed the victim only after being ordered to by her husband while the three lay in bed. He said that the one stab wound she inflicted was only a shallow wound that would not have caused Spicer's death. He contended that the other 3 stab wounds had been inflicted by Randy Bacorny, and that each subsequent wound had been deeper and more life-threatening than the single wound inflicted by Deborah Bacorny. So he said that after the stabbing, Deborah went into the living room, leaving Randy in the bedroom with Spicer. What happened after she left the room, she does not know. Apparently, there was some medical evidence that Deborah Spicer had been sodomized, and Deborah Bacorny had no knowledge of this. Testifying in her own defense, Deborah Bacorny admitted that she was sexually attracted to women, but adamantly denied having any sexual interest in Deborah Spicer. She also described how she tried to stop her husband from attacking Spicer. I tried to pull him off, testified Bacorny, speaking softly through tears. I couldn't redirect him. She trusted me to help her, and I couldn't stop him. She admitted stabbing Spicer one time after her husband handed her a kitchen knife and demanded that she stab her. He said, "You're going to do this," Deborah testified. I said, "I can't do this." He said, "Yes, you can, or you will be next." I really thought he would kill us both. Deborah continued to cry through much of her testimony. At one point, Deputy District Attorney Horner asked the defendant if she recalled telling a friend that she knew how to cry when she wanted or needed sympathy. But Bacorny responded that she did not remember making such a statement to anyone. "Don't give her a chance to victimize someone else," urged DA Horner. "If not the death penalty, then don't let her out again." Despite her excessive crying throughout her trial, Deborah Bacorny showed little emotion when the jury returned to announce that they had found her guilty of aggravated murder. On Wednesday, April 17, 1991, a Multnomah County jury spared Deborah Bacorny her life, just as a different jury had done for her husband. Both were convicted of aggravated murder in their separate trials. Neither of them got the death penalty. However, Deborah's jury was not as lenient as Randy's had been. After failing to find sufficient mitigating factors that would have allowed her a chance of parole after serving 30 years, the jury sentenced Deborah Bacorny to life in prison without the possibility of parole, as where Randy also received life in prison, but with the possibility of parole after 20 years. Both Bacornys are now serving their sentences at Oregon correctional institutions. So at least they got them. Ay, ay, ay. But can you believe that? I mean, I understand why they were given separate trials. They had to be given separate trials since each of them said that the other one did it. But that just goes to show that, boy, they both were convicted of the exact same crime. He got a chance of parole. She did not. That's just different juries.
I mean, it sounds like they were both involved, but, it's hard to tell if somebody really was coerced into something or whether they were doing it of their own free will, or, how do you pick the story apart from both sides?
So my instinct is that they were both equally guilty of the murder and the violence.
That's what I would get that too.
They both probably don't deserve parole, or they should have the same exact sentence, but different juries, they went a little easier on the man. His actions probably seem more natural.
What is that rule about not being able to testify against your spouse, or what is that?
Yeah, you cannot be compelled to testify, sort of like how there's the Fifth Amendment where you can't be compelled to testify against yourself. You also cannot be compelled by the state to testify against your spouse. You can. There's nothing to stop you, but if you don't want to, you can sort of plead, I don't know what it's called, but you can essentially plead the spousal fifth.
So you can opt out of being a witness for the prosecution.
Yes, because there's an assumption that a husband and wife would have intimate detail about each other's lives.
Commitments to each other, and that could cross all kinds of boundaries.
Oh, another detail I left out of the main story was that when they found the Bacornys in the Bacornys van in Wisconsin, that the blood-soaked carpet square was still in the van, and that the van had reeked to high heaven, like smelled like a charnel house. They'd been driving across country in this reeking charnel house van full of blood-soaked rotting carpet.
Wow.
And apparently could not find anywhere on the 2,000-mile drive from Oregon to Wisconsin where they felt like they could dump a reeking bloody carpet square. I've been told that one of the recognizable signs of somebody having a mental break with reality is when they basically become completely oblivious to horrific smells. Losing the instinctual emotional response to just horrible, horrible smells is one of the more common sort of side effects of having a some kind of a psychotic break. It seems to me that if they managed to drive from Oregon to Wisconsin in a stinking van with bloody rotting carpet, and that at no point did they dispose of said piece of carpet, even though they were willing to chuck the body off the cliff in front of a bunch of witnesses. If you can make it 2,000 miles with just a hideous rotting blood smell, you're probably pretty nuts.
Wow.
Well, there's another doozy here on Kinda Murdery.
Not quite.
Thank you so much for... Go ahead, please.
Never mind. I was going to say I thought it was going to be a little sexier, but it qualifies.
Yeah. Anson, I always have a blast hanging out with you. Thank you, everybody, for listening. For Anson Maddox, I'm Zevin Odelberg, and this has been Kinda Murdery.